One thing I would get is that if they would have extra ships, so I don't know, maybe one ship or two ships on standby as a rescue operation if they needed it. That I can understand. The number 15 and then 20, it's not making any sense to me either.
Yeah, yeah. But it was interesting that he used that document that was written by the Apollo engineers, how Apollo worked. I forget the title of it, but basically it was a resume of all the work that they had done to get to the moon with Apollo. When he asked the question of his audience, who were NASA engineers, NASA scientists, have you read it? Nobody put their hand up. Nobody had read it. So they weren't even prepared to look at what had been written before. They're starting from scratch. And they're not doing particularly well because now Artemis 3 has been postponed for another year. I think it'll be postponed again.
Did you, Marcus, when you said they hadn't read it, are you talking about the previous missions, the Apollo missions? They hadn't read how that was technically done?
Yeah. The document was called Apollo Operations Handbook, NASA SP-287. So what made Apollo successful? NASA SP-287. That's the document that he was using, and that's the one that explains how they did it.
None of them read it.
No.
We can be forgiven for not reading it, but these are supposed to be scientists and physicists and engineers, and none of them in that room read it.
No.
Incredible.
Yeah.
And that's what Destin said.
Yeah.
That's what they said. That's what he said. He got right up there and he was reading it, like pointing at the paper like this.
And not one of them put their hand up to say that they'd read it. It was extraordinary.
He asked the engineers in that audience if they had read this. No one put their hand up.
That's right. Yeah.
That's very telling because we're talking about a group of men or professionals, men and women, professionals in that room who obviously believe that NASA landed men on the moon. Yeah. And then the most important document available to them, they shouldn't have to be told about it. They should know about it. Not only that they haven't read it, they didn't seem to know about it.
Yeah.
And if they did know about it, they weren't interested in reading it. That's the only conclusion one can come to, which tells you where are they really at with this? Where are they really at when it comes to the Apollo missions? In my first couple of books, I used some examples from people who were either within NASA or outside of NASA, but connected in some way. They're working for some U.S. agency of some sort, whether it be the National Institute of Weather or whatever you call it. The NOAA actually is the initials. And it's always retired. It's never anybody who is still working within those agencies. They're always retired when they say this. And she said, just by pure luck, nobody was injured on the Apollo missions. Just by pure luck, they managed to get there and back safely. I mean, those two words, pure luck, is what she used. And she used it a couple of times. It was a miracle was another term she used as well. I think science leaves a lot of important information out, like when it comes to spirituality and so on, but that's another topic for another day. But when you're using terms as a scientist, like pure luck, it's a miracle, that to me, according to them, is not scientific. That's not the scientific way of explaining how they went there. Instead of saying they managed to get there and back safely because of this, this, and this. But that's not what she said. It was pure luck and a miracle that they made it there and back in one piece. That's how she put it. And that's not the only person who has said that, professional. Other retired people would say they have nothing to lose now. You can't take their pension away from them, so their careers can't be destroyed. So they're a little more freer to talk about what they really think. And I've read those comments from several people. I've even read comments, and I've documented it in my first two books, conflicting information coming out of NASA and institutions that are indirectly connected to NASA about the potential dangers of a solar flare, whatever the nature of that solar flare is, because even they themselves don't fully understand the makings, if I could put it that way. They don't fully understand what a solar flare is, but they know it's dangerous. And you get conflicting data. It's this intensity. No, it's this intensity, right? And then, of course, you have the August 4th, 1972 event in that shocked NASA, actually absolutely shocked NASA. They were caught by surprise. And yet several months later, they even admit that the astronauts had been caught in that solar event of August 4th, 1972, the astronauts would have been killed. There was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Yet several months later, knowing that there was potential for another one, because the sun activity every 4 years, it changes. I understand that. But they don't really know when they're going to get hit by a solar flare. And even after that, common sense should have dictated to NASA after that August 4th, 1972 event, solar event, not to send another mission up. But they did. They sent Apollo 17, knowing that that could happen again. And that behavior also tells you something about where they were really at the time. And one more thing, in 2011, 2012, they had detected a third belt around the Van Allen belts.
Yeah.
And they didn't know how that belt formed, but they speculated that it was formed by a solar event. So a solar flare of some kind.
Operation Starfish Prime. That was another thing that Bart was talking with Joe about. And I went and I had a look at another program where they were shooting up more nuclear missiles. But I put that program in a video about 2 months back. So what I did was I put this video showing them launching a nuclear missile, and it looked like the sun. The missile went right out into space. It blew up. What they were trying to do was that they were trying to blow a hole in the Van Allen belt so that they could send their ships through. They could send objects through it. And guess what happened? The Van Allen belts fought back, and they ended up getting another belt that they were not counting on. That's what that reminded me of. But Starfish Prime, that was different. They didn't do that to try to blow a hole in the Van Allen belts to send stuff through. That was done earlier. They were going to send something through it. I don't know what it was, maybe rockets, but that was the intent of that particular program.
That leads right into my next point, because if there was, and they did detect a third radiation belt back in 2012, and NASA was at a loss to explain what the cause was, but they did speculate that it might have been a solar flare that caused a temporary formation of a third radiation belt. But then that raises the question, going back to August 4th, 1972, they had a massive solar flare that hit our atmosphere. It caught NASA off guard. Could we speculate that, given what NASA said about the 2012 event, the third radiation belt, could it be possible that there was a third radiation belt formed temporarily after the August 4th, 1972 event? I would have to say yes. And if so, how long did it take for that radiation belt to dissipate? And was it several months? This happened in August, so we're talking only, 3-4 months till December. So that means very likely that the Apollo astronauts, again, talking within the framework of the official version, when the Apollo astronauts in Apollo 17 was going through the outer regions of the Van Allen belts, well, there was no longer the outer regions because there was possibility of a third belt, a radiation belt. So they would have had to go through that as well, meaning that they would have been exposed longer to radiation within the Van Allen belts. These are questions that are never being asked. And that's a question that has to be asked and taken into consideration. And one more point, I wrote this down because I wanted to ask Marcus. Marcus, am I right in saying that the radiation data from Artemis was classified? Has it been released?
Well, it was a question that Bart Sibrel asked, because he was interested, obviously, in that. And he asked NASA for the data on the recording inside the Orion spacecraft, which they were using. And the answer was that it's classified. So Bart said, well, how can it be classified? This is a natural event. You can't classify nature. And they refused to release it. And I think that was probably Bart's impetus with Joe Rogan, because this radiation problem, I mean, there are other problems as well, but the radiation problem is such a severe one that they have to solve it. You remember that, was it Kelly Smith, the NASA engineer who did his little drawing that said, it's dangerous radiation. We have to work out how to overcome it before we can send humans through this section of space. Hang on, guys. Apollo did that much earlier. Where's your data on that? Oh, it's classified. So that is why NASA is getting so upset. And all the proponents should be upset by NASA lying to them to say that we got through the Van Allen belts and we got into deep space, or as Neil Armstrong refers to it, cis-lunar space. Maybe that's what they call it, to differentiate it from deep space, i.e. the space between the Earth and the Moon. But that's full of radiation. The Van Allen belts are only there to protect Earth. They're not there to protect the Moon. So you've got to go into deep space, or you've got to go into cislunar space, unprotected. And anybody who understands a little bit about radiation will say, not me, Gov. I'm not going there unless you can protect me.
Yeah.
How do you protect them? Well, lead's very good. Uranium's quite helpful. Water's quite good. But they're so bloody heavy that you can't get the rocket off the ground. The end result of which will be no humans will land on the moon. No humans have ever landed on the moon for that reason alone. And you remember Bart's interview with Alan Bean, because he was interviewing all the, at the time, the still living moonwalkers, as they were called, the 12 of them who were supposedly walked on the moon. And Bart asked Al Bean, he said, well, did you experience any problems going through the Van Allen belts? And Alan Bean said, I don't think we went that far. Now, that may have been a correct answer, but it's not the right answer. Because if he didn't go that far, and we know where the Van Allen belts are, they're about 1,000 miles up, they didn't go that far, they never got to the moon. Then he corrected himself when he was told he had flown through them. Oh, we must have gone through them. Well, did you notice any effect? And he then come out with his, well, we had stars in the eyes and all the rest of it, which is the normal effect. But it would appear that Apollo never went through the Van Allen belts. They stayed in low Earth orbit. The proponents will say at this point, you would have seen them orbiting the Earth because the Apollo craft was quite big. No, you wouldn't, because nobody was looking for them. Nobody expected them to be there. Why would they be looking for them? And anyway, you wouldn't see them until you were in a particular part of the sky where the sun was below the horizon, illuminating the underside of the craft. Because if you're 200 miles up, you're not going to see anything unless it is reflected by the sunlight on the underside of the craft, because that's how you can see satellites today. And even a jumbo jet, which is quite a big piece of kit, 7 miles up, is almost invisible. You only know it's there because of the condensation trails following it. You can see what's at the front of that. So the idea that you would spot an orbiting spacecraft in 1969 is nonsense. Of course you wouldn't.
And not only that, but your point to seeing a 747 flying overhead at 7 miles, I mean, there's something there, but you can't differentiate between whether it's a 707 or a 747. And the same thing with, I've seen orbiting satellites at night, but I can't tell whether it's the ISS or a satellite, or I don't know what the hell it is. I just see the sun reflecting off something going across the sky. So anybody would say at that moment, oh, that's got to be Apollo because they just blasted off. But you can't differentiate what you're looking at, even with a telescope. You can't differentiate that. There's no definition. And I think there's still some information and data regarding the Apollo programs is classified. And getting back to Artemis, they've classified that information. I'd like to know from the proponents, why are we, as Bart Sibril is asking, why are we classifying this information if it is safe? I haven't heard a reason from the Apollo mission. If you're going to sell this to the people, forget about everything else. Forget about the technological aspect of it for a second. It's the secrets that make people raise an eyebrow. What is going on here? Why are you keeping this secret? Why are you classifying information, as Bart said, that it should be available to all of us? Why? And not one proponent has come back with a satisfactory answer as to why that is happening. That, in and of itself, creates doubt in people's minds.
Doubt. That's a good point, Randy, because it creates doubt. People say, it doesn't make sense. If you're going up to find out what the radiation levels are in space, which is a reasonable thing to do, it's what you'd expect to happen. Why not tell us about it? Then we'll get behind you. You see, this is the problem NASA have got. We can't get behind them and encourage them because they continually lie to us and they continually obfuscate. They just make things difficult. They hold themselves out as being this trailblazing agency looking at space travel, getting humans off the planet into the solar system and beyond. That's what their mission is, but they're not doing it.
No.
And the interesting point, of course, is that nobody working at NASA now was working for Apollo 50 years earlier. They've all retired. They've all or died or moved on or passed over. There's nobody at NASA now who can actually give any advice. They might even be willing to break their oaths of secrecy because there's a great deal of national security at stake here. So obviously people were going to be a little bit concerned about revealing information which could be of benefit to the enemy, i.e. the Soviet Union at the time. But the Soviet Union were quite willing to share information. And President Kennedy, in his famous speech at the UN, when he said he wanted to cooperate with the Soviet Union in the matter of space. That was like 2 weeks before he was killed. Might have had something to do with his death.
It's interesting you bring that up, Marcus. I was mentioning that in another interview a few weeks, I believe, before he was shot. He had ordered NASA Director James Webb to contact anyway and then fly to Russia to meet with his counterpart for their space agency, the Russian space agency, and to discuss détente between our two space agencies and the possibility of working together. And if that was going to be the case, then that can only lead in one direction, the disclosure of the Apollo missions. Maybe not so much that we can't do it, but we've canceled it in favor of working with the Soviets, right? We're going to do a joint Soviet. And of course, that would have exposed the whole thing. And that just adds more fuel to the assassination theories, because that opens up Pandora's box right there. And there's evidence that NASA was secretly working with the Russian space agency anyway during the Apollo era, which we've discussed many times as it pertains to Apollo 13. That really interests me because I had a very interesting back and forth on the video posted on Robert's channel. And this person came at me and he said, oh, the British were involved in the Apollo capsule that was picked up by the Russians. And I said, where are you getting this information? And he says, oh, and he gave me a link, and I checked the link, and I read the link, and it said they were speculating that the Russians were involved. Now, this gets better. I'm looking at this, and I'm thinking, absolutely no sources. The sources that we're using come from Stars and Stripes, the publication within the military, the Russian embassy, the American embassy. All this comes from officials, what we had established and what I wrote about in part 2, book 2. So I asked this individual, can you give me more information? He provides a link, and then the link says, well, we're speculating that the Russians might have been involved. So I came back at him and I asked him further information. He says, no, I already gave you the information. I said, well, that just doesn't add up. He says, well, then let's debate about it. And I said, oh, when do you want to debate? He says, right now. On video? He said, yes. And of course, I wasn't going to take somebody up debating anybody at 1 o'clock in the morning. All right. You know, I need to shut things down. I was up late enough as it was. So I said, why don't we book this for Monday? And so we exchanged Skype information. And I have blogged on Robert's channel that I'm going to be debating this individual. And he's agreed we're going to record it. I'm going to send it to Robert for him to post on this channel. And I'll post the unedited version. And of course, that person would also have the unedited version, because with Skype, everybody gets a copy of the video. And you can download it just in case there's any shenanigans going on or they accuse us of editing. Well, you have the unedited version, right? So we agreed. I get this email from Scott Monday morning. We're supposed to do this Monday at 2 o'clock. I get this email and he said, Randy, put the brakes on this. This is a 14-year-old kid.
Oh, God.
I said, what the hell? And by this time, I'm going back and forth on my business email with this individual I didn't know was a kid. So I messaged him and I said, this is off. We're not doing this. I'm not going to debate a 14-year-old kid. And then I see this video posted, unbeknownst to Scott. He recorded a conversation without Scott's permission. They talked for, I don't know, about 45 minutes or maybe an hour. I'm not sure. He's posted part 4 and it floored me. I said, what the hell is going on? From that point on, I said, no more debating with any of these people unless there's a moderator and that the person is properly vetted. And I was thinking, where's this kid's parents?
Right beside him, coaching him, because that's where he was. When Scott was on there with Taffy, then Crewy ended up joining on Taffy's iPad, and then Taffy flipped it over to the laptop, and now all 4 of them are on there. And then one of them dropped out, and then it was only Taffy and Crewy that were left. And then Scott was sitting in the background. You could hear the kid's father coaching him on from the side, but the father wouldn't show his face. That was the only reason why Scott went on there, because the father was in the room. If he would not have been in the room, they would have terminated that call right there, because right on YouTube, if anyone's under the age of 18, they need their parents' permission first, or else we can get sued for that.
When I say something directly to the father, Robert, don't you ever pull a stunt like that with me or anyone else again, using your own child, hiding behind your own child. What kind of a parent are you? You want to take me on, you take me on one-on-one, all right? And I have a moderator who's 50-50 on the Apollo missions, but don't ever pull a stunt like that again. That is the lowest of the lows that I've ever seen. And that angers me, and it angers anybody with any common decency. Using your own child, your 14-year-old child, You should be ashamed of yourself. The offer is on. You want to have me? We'll debate. You can debate me one-on-one.
Well said.
Good.
That's
Yes.
quite right. Quite right.
You also saw that Phase 52012 and Cornelius' crew are on there using that child as their weapon, because they're sending him to all of my channels. They're sending him over to the lunar landing discussions, and all he's doing is leaving nasty comments over there. So I gave Stray Dog the moderator rights to the channels now, so he's going over there and taking them all out. I mean, enough's enough.
I'm not blaming the kid. The kid is put up to this. I'm blaming his parents, and I'm blaming the other, I have to say this, you morons defending and hiding behind this child. What the hell is wrong with all of you? You want to come at me or Marcus or Robert, by all means do so. But don't hide behind a child. Show yourself like we show ourselves. Be a man about this, okay? Be a real man, a real man. And I'm talking to you out there, because there are all kinds of legal ramifications that can happen with this as well. But this was the lowest of the lowest. I've never seen anything like this before. And maybe the kid is smart. I don't know. He didn't seem stupid to me. He seemed like he was okay. But there was a lot of coaching going on, and you could tell. And for them to stoop that low, I mean, I thought we'd seen it all on here, folks.
Taffy said the crew looks exactly like his avatar, just the same as that father that played in that 70s show. He says crew is the spitting image of this guy. So he said he really picked a good avatar.
Oh, by the way, folks, we're all being reported by Gorel, okay? He's reporting all of us. Yes, he told me that. He's reporting all of us. I'm still waiting for the lawsuits over my book. You know, he's reporting a book on fiction, right?
Oh, he's going to report you to Neil Armstrong's son.
Yeah, he told me that several times. I'm sure Neil Armstrong's son probably told him, it's a book of fiction. I can't do anything about it. And does he know Neil Armstrong's son?
No, of course not.
No, of course not. Yeah, he's in Australia. But I just let you all know he's reporting us.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah.
I wonder how he's doing it.
Yeah, good question. I wonder what during his recreational time when he's playing the guitar and having a few and
recording us.
Us. Yeah.
Well, good luck. You know, I got nothing to hide. You know, our so-called debate with Steve Mumbling. Remember that?
Yeah, that was good. I enjoy that.
Yeah, and then Blue Earth thing, he tried it as well. That was quite amusing.
He opened up the Happy Deer Observatory, and that was the end of him.
Yeah.
But you know what? He was the only one who actually answered. In other words, when he said he was going to come on and debate us, he did. He was actually there. He showed up and he showed his face. I mean, let's face it. Even that kid showed his face. He caught Taffy off guard, but he still showed his face. These cretins can't even do that much. They can't show their faces. They're so scared. So what are they afraid of?
He got a little childish at times, but for the most part, he was civilized in the debate that we were on with him, Marcus. And he was really good when you debated him. He was behaving himself, but he was no match.
I enjoyed that.
Yeah, he basically got a lesson, but I'll give him credit that at least he came on and he showed his face and he debated. So he gets credit for that, for sure.
Somebody else I've debated, Peter Bassett, over in the UK. It was a radio interview rather than a video interview. And I think it was with Neil Peel. I think that's where it started. Anyway, I got fairly heavy with him because he didn't appear to know what he was talking about. After that interview went out, he reported me and Neil to the UK regulator of broadcasting called Ofcom, Office of Communication, because he wasn't allowed to know what the questions were before they were asked. When he was told that Ofcom, this regulator, don't regulate the internet, he disappeared. Now, I've never, ever been given questions in advance. I don't know anybody who's been given any questions in advance, well, to do with Apollo specifically. The whole point is that you give a spontaneous answer. You're asked a question, you then answer it, depending on what the question is, as accurately as you can. Maybe you make the odd slip, maybe you make the odd technical hitch in it, but you answer it, and you're never given advance notice of the questions. And that's what he expected. So when I then said to him later on, look, I'll come and present my case at your local astronomy group down in the south of England. And he said, no, we want people who know what they're talking about. Well, presumably with astronomy, that would be the case. And he's done a few hit pieces on me, which didn't seem to work very well. because I made some comment about how can you see if you're wearing a full helmet, a spacesuit, a helmet, how can you see where the ladder is? So he then counters that by filming himself blindfolded walking up a ladder, as if that is supposed to refute what I said about Buzz Aldrin coming down the ladder on Apollo 11.
Oh, by the way, too, he also has a mask on, a blindfold.
Yes, he does. Because that's supposed to show that you can walk up a ladder with a blindfold. Yes, you can. Of course you can. But can you see at the top of the ladder where your first step is? He didn't come down the ladder.
He came at me on my YouTube channel, like he posted comments. I didn't come at him. He came at me. And then so we went back and forth. And I asked him, I said, do you want to debate on video? And he said no. And that was the end of that. I never heard from him again. He did say he was going to mention me in his book on, yeah, sure, whatever. Do what you want. But he's a strange individual, Peter Bassett.
Yeah.
I read his book, by the way, for all of you proponents out there. I do read the other side. I read his book. And there was not one argument in there that was valid. I could dispute all those arguments. He's just picking this, picking that.
I actually went through that book and made some notes about what he was talking about and sent him an email saying, could you answer these questions? Where do you get this quote from? Who said it? He starts each chapter with a quote, supposedly from an Apollo denier, he calls. I called him out on that as well. The word denier is not appropriate to use. And various other points he made, which were questionable, which is being polite. I never had a reply. But he mentions me 12 times in his book. And I thought, well, that's generous of him. At least people will know who they should be talking to.